So I'm currently driving across America to get to a better van building location because the scorching heat in Vegas was just not making it possible to get any work done. And I decided building in a van while living in it is just fully out of my skill range. But that means I had to pack up all of my belongings into the van and live in it like this for about a week while I drive back east. Last night I stayed at this Love's truck stop, which actually was super nice and had showers and even RV hookups.
Good morning. So despite the tense video topic today, I'm actually in a great mood, and I think that's possible. I think it's possible to recognize some downsides of van life, to have days of van life that have bad things in them and still be having a great time and love doing it. I really want to say that first before we get into this topic today, because I love van life, and I know I talk about the downsides a lot. That's because I want people who watch my videos to be ready if they get into van life and to know what they're really getting into. And this is something that caused a lot of controversy in my last video, with a lot of the comments, saying you're wrong, you shouldn't say that. And it's just how I feel. And I reached out to some other van lifers that I know, and they had similar stories and felt similar ways. So I actually wanted to re-bring it up today and talk about it again, because I think it's really important to talk about the just diverse amount of feelings you're going to have when you're living in a van. So here's the thing. Van life does sometimes make me feel homeless. It isn't a constant feeling. It really fluctuates for me day to day how I'm feeling about it, but it also fluctuates for person to person, experience to experience. And there's so many different factors that play into that. Whether it's how much money do you have to go into your vehicle? Where are you living? Do you have freedom to travel? So what a lot of people were saying was that I am technically not homeless. I would be considered houseless. And, by those terms, I really haven't felt like I have a home lately. I used to have a $70,000 van built out with a lot of different gadgets and gizmos in them. And now I'm sleeping on cardboard boxes, and I am really struggling. And not only that, I can't be in my van during the day in Las Vegas, where I was living for 7 months, because as soon as the sun rises, it gets too hot to be in the vehicle. So I have to go somewhere else, a library, the gym. I'm forced out of my own home until the sun sets again. And that, honestly, when you're forced out of, this place that you're calling my home, it doesn't really feel like a home. So when a lot of these comments started pouring in, I reached out to a few of my friends and I said, hey, have you guys ever felt homeless as a van lifer? And there was one common thing that I noticed that really brings out that feeling. And that is the fact that oftentimes we are using the exact same resources as people who are genuinely homeless. Whether that be, for example, for me, it was the library. And I was sitting in this, back room in this, very close quarters, desks just one after the other, in a row of other people who were all very clearly homeless. And when I looked around and I realized I needed that same resource in order to survive, I realized that was the big moment for me that kind of incited the comment in the last video, was, this moment where I was sitting around them because I needed the same thing as them, because I did not have it, because I had given it up in order to pursue van life. And one of my friends, their story that was similar to mine was that they were waiting at a park in the morning when, the sun came up for the person in charge of the park to come and lock the bathrooms. And they needed to use the bathroom because they live in a van. They were waiting for the bathrooms. And the person they were waiting with was very clearly homeless. And that was their moment where they were like, shit, I think I might, I feel like I might be homeless. And it's not this, constant long feeling that you're having all of the time. And it's not, this horrible, awful feeling. I'm not saying it's this terrible thing to feel homeless. I'm not saying this is the thing that's going to make me quit van life. I am saying that there are going to be times in a van life journey where you may feel like you are homeless because you are using similar resources, or you're waiting in the same lines for the same things. And you just look around and you realize that you are surrounded by real people who really need help. And that could honestly go into this whole new direction of, do van lifers take resources away from people who are homeless? And I think when it comes to things like the bathrooms or, a seat at the library, that's not, honestly, I don't think that van lifers are taking away those spaces. I think, there's other spaces in the library. There are, you just wait a minute to go to the bathroom. You know what I mean? But I think that could be a really interesting conversation. But that's a whole different video for a different time. It's just when you're surrounded and you're waiting in the same lines. And I think that's kind of when my first feeling came over me lately. And it wasn't this giant thing of shame or bad that I think a lot of the comment sections making it seem like I was trying to say. it's just this moment of awareness and, recognition in your life, or you're looking around and you're going, I've taken resources away from myself that I could have had if I didn't choose this journey, but I love this journey and I want to continue to choose it. I just am recognizing that this is, something that I did, and just kind of like stating facts and taking it and moving on. And there's going to be days where that's completely fine. You're like, this is kind of funny. And there's going to be days where you're going to be like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And that's just the ups and downs that come with van life. For me, what I've always said, the difference between homelessness and van life is the choice. And the choice of, do you want to be living in this vehicle? Do you want to have the amount of amenities that you have right now? Where are you in your life? Are you being forced into the situation? And I did get into van life out of choice and passion. And I did live in my first van out of choice and passion. But this van build I really thought would be so much easier. I thought it would be so much faster. I did not realize how difficult living in a van while building it out would be. And I don't feel like anymore I am living in this van out of choice. Kind of to backtrack for a moment, it also begs the question of, is this really van life, right? Like, is this setup that I have right now, sleeping on top of boxes of Havelock wool and barely being able to walk through the van and not having an organization system, is any of this technically van life? And it's, of course, obviously not the Instagram version of van life. Van life is such a huge, diverse group of people, right? You've got people in, $1 million vans, and you've got people in empty minivans, right? And I've, experienced kind of a wide range of that. My last van was about $70K. I had everything I could ever need. And I've, been living in this, on the floor, on a mattress, on cardboard, and so I've really felt that whole spectrum. But I don't want to be living like this anymore. And that's why lately I felt like this is not my choice. This is not what I would choose for myself anymore. I get really embarrassed when I meet up with my friends and they see my van like this. I make jokes about it and I try to be lighthearted, and I'm actually really good at just being like, but there comes a point where lately I've just been really embarrassed about the van and my living situation. And I never was embarrassed about my van before now. I definitely had situations where I realized there are certain people you don't want to tell you live in a van because they're going to judge you for it. But I was always really proud of that choice. I'm not proud of this choice. At the end of the day, though, I'm really lucky that most of my friends are van lifers. They understand it, they get it, they've been there, and they're really accepting of that, which is really nice. However, it hasn't always been like that. I remember the first time I ever felt shame about living in a van. And it was actually when I was in my super fancy, bougie 70K ProMaster van I had before. And it was the first time I thought to myself, oh, okay, so this is super cool on social media. People love it and will like it and support you on social media. But there are going to be groups of people who are just not going to understand what you're doing or why you're doing it. And the closest thing they can think in their mind to pair it with is going to be homelessness. And so for me, that very first experience is when I was in Vermont. I was working as a tour guide and as like an ice cream scooper at the Ben & Jerry's original factory up in Vermont, which was very cool. I loved that job. Got to eat ice cream every day. It was great. I didn't tell anyone at first I was living in the van, but I was living in the van, not in the parking lot of the facility at first. I actually would drive to Walmart 30 minutes and back because it was dead of winter. I needed my car to be able to have the battery built up from that drive because it wasn't getting it from the sun during the day. So I was driving there and back. And so no one really knew. They saw me get in and out of the van, but they didn't assume anything of it. I actually had one friend who did not realize the van was mine, and they were like, did you see that creepy red van in the driveway or in the parking lot? Did you see that? Like, I don't ever park near it because I'm really scared that like I'm gonna get kidnapped. And I laughed so hard, and I was like, that's my van. Like that's mine. And I thought it was really funny. And that's kind of when I started thinking, oh, this is kind of a funny thing. And I started making jokes about it at work. And I started being like, they'd make comments and they'd be like, oh yeah, my pipes froze over. And I was like, my house doesn't even have pipes. And I would just make like little jokes, like jabs like that. We walked into the freezer room with the ice cream and I was like, dang, this thing is bigger than my whole house. And I started making like little side comments, even though no one knew I was living in the van. And I thought it was hilarious. They were like my own little inside jokes that would freak everyone else out. And I now realize why that's probably not funny for them. But it was hilarious for me because again, I was really proud and I loved what I did. So one day I made a joke too far. and they got it. They understand it. And they were like, do you live in your van? And I was like, yeah. They didn't find it funny. And then after that, they started treating me different. And they'd be like, hey, if you ever need anything, if you need to come over, if it gets too cold, I have, if you ever need dinner, I can make you dinner. If you ever need a place to park, like offering me food, offering me different things, saying, if you need to make extra money, or if you need money or something, let me know, I can help you. And I was like, oh, no, actually, I like this. I chose this. I want to do this. If I wanted to pay for rent, I could, but so I'm working a minimum wage job. I'm not making a lot of money at that point. And it was fine for me because I didn't have rent and I didn't have any other bills. So I was fine to be taking this, minimum wage job that I was really passionate about. And that's why I really got into van life, because I enjoy traveling state to state and taking those odd jobs. I worked at Martin Guitar. I worked at a witch dungeon in Salem, Massachusetts. And I got to take these minimum wage jobs that are actually really cool and learn about, these places. And I loved it, but it doesn't really pay rent and bills. So that's why van life really worked for me. And they really didn't get it. And they always treated me differently after that point. And I felt a lot of shame then about the van and about my living situation, because they constantly would bring things up. I called into the office one day and they were like, hey, you really can't be sleeping here. And I was like, I'm not. I don't sleep here. Sometimes after my shift though, I will stay 3 hours in the parking lot. It's a 24-hour business. There are people in the factory 24/7. And I stayed late and they called me into the office the next day and I was like, I was just eating nachos because I was tired and didn't want to drive to Walmart yet. I don't stay here. And it was so embarrassing. It was so embarrassing. And then they had the whole speech of, do you need anything? Are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And it's just, you're going to be treated differently. And those kind of people who don't understand, and no bad things on them. They were trying to be very sweet. They had really good intentions. But that's just, it ended up making me feel like I was doing something shameful or like I was homeless because they were treating me that way, unfortunately. And that kind of transfers over into other times in my life where when you meet people, you begin to ask yourself, should I tell them I live in a van? Are they going to accept me if I tell them I live in a van? What point is good to, cross that bridge and tell them? Are they going to treat me differently? But also with stealth camping, oftentimes you feel like you're hiding away your life and you're having to live in secret, like you're doing something dirty or like you're not supposed to be where you are. Sometimes people look at you and they give you a weird look, like they know you live in there. And then sometimes the look and this is obviously I could be reading into this and I could just be self-conscious, or they could really be thinking it, which is, oh, what happened that made them have to live in that van? And you really just got to get past other people's opinions, right? That's part of it. If you just don't care about anyone's opinions, that's gonna get you so far in life. So far. Let me know if you figure out how to do that, because I'm not the best at it yet. I also feel like a big piece in that comes into East Coast versus West Coast van life. West Coast, I have found it's so much more accepting. You get so much less of that because people understand it. They do think it's cool. There is so much of it everywhere you go. But on the East Coast, people just really don't understand it. They don't see it. It's not around. They're not seeing other camper vans. So when they see a van, it's very rare and they just automatically, connect that with homelessness. On the West Coast, they understand it better. Now people do it out of choice because it's a lot more popular. But I will say, while I was over there, I heard numerous things that were crazy that were happening of van lifers not being accepted. So, of course you're going to have cop interactions where they're going to, sometimes be, sassy or rude to you and assume the worst. But there's things like I had a friend who was at a park who was sitting there and their friend someone was driving by and threw an empty can at their van and yelled a slur at them. And I just, and it was just because they were a van lifer and people don't like, these parks getting filled up with van lifers sometimes. Crazy story. There at the same park, there was a guy who was going around camper van to camper van knocking. And this is literally so crazy. And he was asking for a phone charger. And people were not really fully opening their doors. I would not answer. I know how my safety routine is very much so. I don't answer unless I know you and you're planning on knocking on my van. I do not answer. Because I don't know you. And the story is going to definitely cement why that's a good idea and a good way to live. So he's knocking, door to door. Someone finally answers, goes to get him a phone cord, and he stabs them to death. stabs them so many times they die. The police show up, shoot that guy in the head. That's what I heard, okay? That is the story I heard from the other van lifers who stay at that spot, which is insane because like I learned that story like 5 days later when I had started sleeping at that spot 3 days before. So I could have been there that day, which is crazy. I don't know if he was targeting van lifers. I don't know if he had an issue with people being there. I have no idea. But it happened. And there were numerous witnesses and it was crazy. And at the end of the day, the guy's dead, so we can't, talk to him or figure out what it is. But that's a different story for a different time. On sort of a polar opposite point as well, or kind of going off of that or whatnot, is this concept of, I'm 27 years old and relationships and dating. I'm living in a van like this. Who wants to date a girl who's living in this? Sometimes y'all are so precious. You're like, just go get a boyfriend. I'm like, who wants to date a girl who's living in this? And that's just flat, right? Like, so I did meet someone a few months ago and I thought things were going great. And I think part of what made it not work was the van, even though they were also a van lifer. I do think having an unbuilt van kind of was an ick to him. I don't know, right? Like, I don't know. Dating and van life don't go great together. That's a whole different conversation for a different time. But my point is, if you're, wanting to get into a relationship, living in a van, a lot of people are just going to see you as homeless and it's going to be very hard to have a relationship. Just to sum it up real quick, even if people aren't judging me about my van, in a relationship sense, I'm always going to feel judged about it. Kind of flipping the conversation to a different angle would be that I think living in a van has completely opened my eyes to the actual homelessness crisis in America. Because end of the day, what am I talking about? I am saying I feel homeless. I am not saying I am homeless. I am not saying that the struggles that I am going through are anywhere near the struggles people who are actually homeless and living on the streets are going through. And I see that so much more. I don't know if it's because I'm traveling, because I'm outside late at night. When I lived in Vermont, there was a guy who lived in the woods behind the Walmart where I lived. And it was getting down to like -10 at night. There was a guy who I watched go into the storage donation unit and sleep in there one night and use the clothes as a blanket. You drive through all of these big cities and you realize like homelessness is out of control everywhere all across America. I am just so thankful that, I do have this vehicle. I have locks on the doors and that I can go to sleep at night. And while sometimes I do feel a little unsafe, it is nothing compared to if I didn't have this vehicle to protect me and a place to go to. And that is why I get the argument of you're houseless and not homeless. And something else that really splits van life from homelessness is the fact that, like, for example, I was feeling like I was getting heat stroke in this van. And I was, just overheating and I was really struggling. And I had the means and I had the ability to get a hotel and take a break. Real homeless people are not able to just go get a hotel whenever they want and take a break. That is an absolute luxury that I'm so thankful to have. If you saw that last video, I really was getting on the brink of a heat disaster. I couldn't think straight. My brain was melting. And I had the ability to just, all I had to do was get past my ego and my stubbornness and I could get a hotel. And that is an absolute gift and a privilege. And I'm so thankful to be able to have that. I'm also, something else that my friend made a point to me about a while ago was getting into van life is a lot easier when you have people you can go back to if things go wrong. I am so thankful that I have a family that I know if this vehicle breaks down in the middle of nowhere, I have a major problem, something goes wrong, they will fly out to help me, that I can fly back to them. If the van gets totaled, I can fly back home and figure it out. Not everyone has somewhere else to go. And I think that is what can make getting into van life so much more scary. Also, I think something else that makes a difference between, homelessness and van life is if you were to break down, are you stuck in that town? Are you stuck in that spot? Are you able to get a hotel? Are you able to go somewhere else? Are you just stuck in your vehicle not being able to move if you break down? And, end of the day, end all be all, I really do say, no matter what, for me, in my opinion, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, is it really comes down to choice. How does someone see themselves and see where they are in their life and how do they want to identify as, do they feel homeless or do they feel like they're doing van life? And that's two very different things that's why I think it's so easy for me to sometimes like have these random feelings where I do sometimes feel like, shit, did I make myself homeless? And my phone overheated. So in an attempt to kind of wrap this up, because I do have to get back on the road, I am driving across to the East Coast, I do not think that I am homeless in any way. I'm not saying that I am homeless. I am saying there have been points in my van life journey where I felt homeless. Also, another point that I kind of had this similar, feeling in the past few weeks was I went to get my back door fixed, and I made an appointment with a dealership, a ProMaster dealership, a Ram dealership. And I came in, I brought my van on time at the appointment, and they were like, "You're gonna have to leave it overnight." And I was like, you just gotta tighten the back. I watched a YouTube video. You just gotta tighten the back door. It's not a big deal. It shouldn't take you very long. And they were like, "Sorry, you gotta leave it overnight. There's no other way. We're not gonna be able to hit it today. We've got a long line backed up." And I was like, "But I made an appointment for 10 a.m. for this small little project. It should, I made an appointment. What does an appointment mean to you?" And they're like, "No, you gotta leave it overnight." And that's, my home is literally being taken away from me. They are taking my home, and now I have no home, and I would have to get a hotel in order to have a place to sleep that night, or I would literally be homeless. And that can happen at any moment. At any moment in van life, your van can get totaled. Your van can have a problem, need to be in the shop for 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks, technically by name, you are homeless. And so those are kind of things you have to address and stare at, the face of when you're getting into van life. And so that was a moment in the last, just 2 weeks where I was like, "You want to take my home for 48 hours and maybe need more just to fix this little backdoor problem?" So I ended up going on Amazon. I bought the $12 piece, and I'm fixing it myself, because the price of a hotel and the Uber there, and not knowing how long it could have been extra time just because I'm waiting in this long line. And I was like, could I go to another dealership and make another appointment? And he was like, "Nope, this is kind of how all dealerships work." And I was like, well, that's not gonna work for me. So yeah, that was another point where I literally would have been homeless. And I just really want to express these things because I really don't want people to get into van life and not know that these are things that could happen and feelings you could feel. So much of van life is, the beautiful waterfalls, and it is that Instagram lifestyle sometimes, and it feels so great. And I, I've been on this incredible adventure, just took an amazing road trip with my mom that, is unparalleled, and I love it. And there's so many reasons that van life has given me that opportunity, whether it's because I'm saving money on rent, because I have the vehicle to be able to travel in, even when it's in this state. And I love van life, and I want to do it for a very long time. But that doesn't mean that there's not ups and downs to it, that there's not give and take. I could be making this video about a house and, about the ups and downs of living in a house. There are plenty. But I just feel like it's a bit of my responsibility as someone who makes videos about the upsides of van life to also talk about and highlight those downsides. One of my favorite comments that I get is when people are like, "I bought a van because I was watching your videos and I wanted to get into van life," and I love that. But I want to be responsible about that too, and I want to share the ups and downs and let people know what they're getting into. And that's why I always say resilience is the number one thing you got to have when you're getting into van life, because there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be a lot of feelings, and that's why van life really helps guide you to yourself and gives you so much space for growth and to figure out who you are and to figure out what you want in life. And that is so beautiful, and I love that. There's just a lot of things that come with that, and that's okay, and it's worth it to me. And I hope that if you're thinking about getting into van life, or if you're in van life, that it's worth it to you too. At the end of the day, I think something that would really help all of us is just stop putting labels on everything, right? Like, the whole point of this video is am I homeless? Am I not homeless? Am I feeling that way? Am I not? What word can we put into this to put me in a box, to be able to know how I'm feeling? Maybe there doesn't need to be a label to it. Maybe there doesn't need to be a box to everything, and we can just kind of flow through life and be like, I'm at a different point. Sometimes there's ups, sometimes there's lows, and I don't have to label those times. I can just feel things as they come and go, like an ocean wave or something, So that's kind of what I plan on doing. I'm not going to label it. I am struggling with the van build right now, but we're going to get to it. I am on my way to get back to my parents' house to finish building this out in the driveway, where, that's when I started building it out, and I was doing like 2 projects a week, and I was getting through it. And then I tried to live in it while building it out, and I learned that's not as easy as it looks. So again, all just part of the process, part of the ups and downs and the resiliency and the learning.